Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries podcast, and in this episode I'm just going to be doing a follow-up to my UK Games Expo 2019 episode, where I'm going to be talking about one of the games that I ran and really enjoyed. So it sounds like we've got a call on the line, so let's see who they are and what they've got to say.
Hey John, it's Colin. Good to meet up with you the other day, man, and thanks for running Dark Places and Demogorgons. It was one of the games on my list that I've wanted to try out, so cheers, man. It comes to my attention that there's this Alas the Awful Sea game knocking around. I think I got the name right. And I believe that was something you was looking to run a couple of weeks back. I'd be interested to hear what you make of it. It sounds pretty cool. And just interested in your thoughts, man. Anyway, take it easy and I'll catch you later.
Thanks for getting in touch, Colin. That's Colin, aka Spike Pit, another OSR anchorite. I'm more than happy to talk about Alas for the Awful Sea. I'm not going to go into a full sort of review level detail here, just give you a sort of broad overview of it and what I think of it. Now, Alas for the Awful Sea is a Powered by the Apocalypse game. So if you're familiar with Dungeon World, Apocalypse World, pretty much any other game that has World as the second title, you'll know what the mechanics are. Basically, you roll a 2d6, you add a stat. If you get 6 or less, you've failed or a complication occurs. You get a 7 to 9, you've partially succeeded, but something's gone awry. You get a 10 plus, you've succeeded. That's pretty much what there is to the mechanics. Now, in Power by the Apocalypse games, the mechanics are framed as moves. So a lot of people sort of get hung up on moves, so thinking that they restrict your creativity or what you can do. I personally don't think that's the case. I just think that moves, so like you'd have like an attack move, a persuade a person move, an examine the occult move, stuff like that. All I think they are is they're ways of framing the mechanics to do what we all do in role play anyway. It's no different from, say, you're playing D&D and something and you're confronted by an enemy and you say, I'm going to attack them, and the GM says, make a combat roll. It's no different from that. All these mechanics do is they frame how the GM responds and what rolls they ask you to make. But to get on to for me, the more interesting bit, which is the background of the game, Alas for the Awful Sea is set in the sort of isolated areas of the British Isles in the early 19th century. It's a fairly desperate time for many people, with increased legislations and a good majority of people not really having any say over their lives, with power resting in the hands of the few. It's a time when smuggling is rife and people turn to desperate measures in order to feed their families, make a living, etc. Now, as you might expect, this gives rise to anger, conflict, and feelings of inadequacy and desperation. And Alas for the Awful Sea sort of condenses this down into small islands, so like the Outer Hebrides and places like that around the British Isles. And the way it frames this is that your characters are members of the crew of a sailing ship. And in order to do this, you pick from a number of playbooks. These are the sort of the frameworks of the character sheets, which you then customize to make your characters, and they're based on the position on board the ship. So there is like a stowaway, a captain, a cook, a landsman who goes ashore and hunts when they make shore, and various things like that. But that's where it'd tend to stop with most sort of Power by the Apocalypse games. But in Alas for the Awful Sea, you also get like a second part of your character sheet which you pick, which sort of describes like the more intangible, sort of like emotional and sort of supernatural, I suppose, side of your characters. So for instance, you have the sibling, which is you're related to someone. You have the lover, you've got a passionate affair with someone. You have the creature, which is that your character has something inherently supernatural about them. And when you take this main character sheet, which is your job board ship, and this secondary part, and put them together, they each give you little sort of, I suppose, special moves that make your character a little bit unique. So, for example, the creature, they have a move where they can show their true form. Effectively, they shuck off their mortal disguise and reveal their monstrousness or their otherness for all to see, and that gains you certain bonuses. It's a really interesting setting. I really enjoy the game. It's great for one shot, since creating a character doesn't take very long at all, and it's a very evocative setting. The great thing about it for me is the GMing advice which is offered in the book, which is really top notch, and there's a number of GM sheets provided to help you out with running the games. And the way it phrases the game is that you should focus on conflicts that are going to be occurring. Conflicts are a very big part of this setting, as you might expect. And the GM sheets get you, first of all, to design like the island and the town where you're going to have people. And it's sort of like a multiple choice sheet that prompts you to spur you on to create ideas. Once you've done that, you create 2 or 3 groups of NPCs, which are the conflicting groups that are going to bump heads in the scenario. Then you detail important NPCs based on that. And your player characters are pretty much thrown into the middle of that. So I ran a single scenario of this at the UK Games Expo 2019, and the scenario I ran was basically focused around the idea that there was a huge island with a textile mill on it, and the old moneyed family who owned the textile mill had recently laid off all their local workers because they were bringing in a lot of cheaper immigrant labour. Now, the aim of this scenario is that both the immigrant labour and the original working force were starting to butt heads, but there were threads that tied them together and that could cause them to overcome these prejudices and sort of build a better tomorrow, if you will. But a lot of that depended on the PCs and how they chose to interact with them. They could either fan the fires of this potential rebellion, or they could try and sort it out with the minimum of casualties. The players who were in the game that I ran did an excellent job, and they ended up leading a group rescue attempt of the newcomers and the traditional populace to rescue 2 of their number from a storm cave as water was rising around them. And that really cemented the 2 disparate communities together as one. It was a great game, really enjoyed it, had great fun running it. If you're at all interested in a slightly quirky, albeit potentially a little bit depressing setting, I really recommend you give Alas for the Awful Sea a go. It's created by Story Brewers Roleplaying, www.storybrewersroleplaying.com, and I'll put a link to the description in this episode. But if you're looking for something a little bit different, that has a fairly simple engine behind it, and that is great for one-shots, I honestly can't say how well it'd sort of stand up with a long-running campaign, because I've not run one yet. I really recommend that you give this a go. And it is a beautiful, beautiful book with some very interesting ideas. A lot of great sort of period details about the 19th century. And it's just an enjoyable book to read that really makes you want to run it. Hopefully I'll get around to running it maybe at a future UK Games Expo, or maybe even running some one-shots online. So I hope that's answered your question, Colin. Hopefully I'll catch up with yourself at a future convention, and I'm looking forward to the game of mine that you're going to be playing in at the start of July. So that's it for this episode. Take care, and whatever games you're playing, I hope you're enjoying them. The music at the start of this episode was Exotica by Juanitos, used under public domain license. Until we see you next time, take care and happy gaming.